Good morning, dear students. Once again, welcome back to the English literature class. Today, we are going to wind up the short story which we were studying from the last number of classes. And here we are going to see the climax of the story. We are going to discuss about the tail end of the story. Here we are discussing the same chapter, unit number 4, Huts and Hans by O. Henry, part 5. Do you remember where we have stopped in the last class? The glum-faced man demanded for a drink, and he told he was half dead for a pipe. Since he demanded for a drink and tobacco, Mr. Easton decided to leave the compartment. He wound up the conversation with Miss Fairchild and was about to leave. Do you remember the last sentence? The bound travelers rose to their feet, Easton with the same slow smile on his face. This was the last sentence which we have discussed in the last class. So, the bound travelers, Mr. Easton and the glum-faced man, they stood up from their seat, and when they were about to leave, on the face of Mr. Easton, there was a smile. So, dear students, let's see what had happened later. I can deny a petition for tobacco, he said lightly. It's the one friend of the unfortunate. Goodbye, Miss Fairchild. Duty calls, you know. He held out his hand for a favor. So, there is a new word for you. Petition, an earnest request. So, I can deny a petition for tobacco. Since the glum-faced man demanded for tobacco, Mr. Easton told, I cannot simply deny it. It was an earnest request. It was an earnest request and I cannot simply deny it. And there is a reason behind it, because it's the one friend of the unfortunate. Anyway, he is going to be imprisoned. He will be sent behind the bars, and there he is going to face a lot of difficulties. There his life will be very miserable. So at least before he is going behind the bar, before going behind the bars, his sudden interest or sudden request can be fulfilled. And after all, he is asking for some tobacco. So I cannot simply deny it. Goodbye, Miss Fairchild. So officially he said dispersal to Miss Fairchild. Duty calls, you know. So for me, my duty is first. Since I am a marshal, I have to give respect to my duty. You know that. He held out his hand for a favor. He took out his left hand for a favor. It's too bad you are not going east, she said, reclothing herself with manner and style. But you must go on to Leavenworth, I suppose. So, Miss Fairchild, she was still having an intention to live with Mr. Easton, because she was always requesting that it's very comfortable for me. The climate is very comfortable for me in the east rather than in the Washington. The eastern part of the country is in favor of me. And all those things she was talking throughout her conversation. And that's why she is telling at the end, it's too bad you are not going east, you are going to Washington, Leavenworth, rather than going to east, she said, reclothing herself with the manner and style. So, once when they were about to leave, Mr. Easton and the glum-faced man was about to leave, at the time, she started to follow the same formalities which she was following in the beginning, before the arrival of Mr. Easton, reclothing herself with the manner and style. She came back to her former feelings. But you must go on Leavenworth, I suppose. So, I'm asking that you must go to Leavenworth, since you are a marshal, you are a responsible officer, and you have to go there. Yes, said Easton, I must go on to Leavenworth. Of course, it's my duty and I have to do it, and I'm a responsible officer. I must go on to Leavenworth. I have to continue my journey to Leavenworth. The two men slid down the aisle into the smoker. There's a new word for you. Siled, which means walked on an awkward way as if they did not want to be noticed. A walking style that the people should not notice them. In such an awkward way, they were walking down the aisle. We have already seen the meaning of the word aisle, which means a narrow path in between the seats in a train or flight or somewhere. Okay, the two men sailed down the aisle into the smoker. So they left their compartment, they left the seat where they were sitting, and they moved towards the smoke room in the train. The two passengers in a seat nearby had heard almost of the conversation. Said one of them, "That Marshall is a good sort of chap. Some of these Western fellows are all right." So now we are going to see what was the climax, or what was the tail end, the most important twist of the story. The two passengers in a seat nearby had heard most of the conversation. So near to them there were sitting two passengers. They have heard almost the entire conversation which made between Miss Fairchild, Mr. Easton and the glum-faced man. And one of those passengers, he told to the other, "That Marshall is a good sort of chap. Actually, that Marshall is a very good man. Some of these Western fellows are all right. Some of the officers in the western part of the country, some of the police officers in the western part of the country, they are very good in nature. Pretty young to hold an office like that, isn't he?" asked the other. So the other fellow, the second fellow, told to the first fellow as a reply, "So pretty young to hold an office like that. So he's a marshal and he's very young, looking very young, and at this young age who has got the charge of such a serious and important post, isn't he?" asked the other. "Young," exclaimed the first speaker. "Why, oh, don't you catch on? Say, did you ever know an officer to handcuff a prisoner to his right hand?" There is a new word for you. Catch on, which means understand. In the second line you can see, "Don't you catch on," which means don't you understand. Let's see what is the meaning of the last sentence of this story. "Young," exclaimed the first speaker. So the first person got exclaimed. He was really embarrassed. What was that? "Why, oh, don't you catch on? Haven't you noticed? Haven't you understand? Don't you understand? Say, did you ever know an officer to handcuff a prisoner to his right hand?" So what is the twist of the story? A policeman will never handcuff himself with a prisoner's left hand, which means, suppose there is a handcuff with a policeman and he is having its key in his right hand. So of course he will be handcuffing his left hand with the right hand of the culprit. Here what had happened? Miss Fairchild was not able to recognize who the real culprit. Actually, who was the real culprit? Mr. Easton. And who was the marshal? The glum-faced man. Because the glum-faced man's left hand chained with the right hand of Mr. Easton. That's what the co-passenger says. Do you ever know an officer to handcuff a prisoner to his right hand? So if an officer has to handcuff A prisoner to his right hand means it is practically not possible. So here the passenger noticed it. That's why he says that the glum-faced man is the real marshal and Mr. Aston is the culprit who has done the wrong activities, who interfered in the or who engaged in the counterfeiting. So I hope you have got a clear picture about the chapter. So who is the real culprit? Mr. Aston. And who is the real officer or the marshal? The glum-faced man. So this is the twist of the story, written by O. Henry. Students, I hope that you have enjoyed the story very well. Now it's your turn. Learn the chapter very well and try to understand all the concepts very well. With this, we are winding up this chapter. We have completed this lesson, and in the next class we will be discussing the next chapter. Till then, I would like to sign off. Thank you.